Okay, I'm here today with Amy Hewitt, who is the director of the Research and Training Center here at the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota.
That's a mouthful.
Yes, it is. It is a mouthful. Um, so, first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about um, the trend we have toward the possibility of building more institutions for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I guess, sort of in a nutshell, um, why do you think that that's even on the table at this point, considering we spent so many years trying to close institutions? And I don't know, it seems like um, if we build more, we're in fact going backwards instead of going forward.
It's a good question, Carol, and a good point. But yeah, I think there is in the United States efforts to build new places. They're not being called institutions. They're being called gated communities where only people with intellectual disabilities will live, kind of behind closed gates. And they're being called campuses where there might be several buildings and only people with disabilities live there. Or sometimes they're called farmsteads where people with intellectual disabilities live out in the country and work on a farm. So they're kind of all new names for institutions. And I think there's lots of reasons why these are being thought of. One of those reasons is that the people who are advocating for them maybe aren't as old as you and I and don't remember institutions, and they don't have that experience of seeing what can happen when people with intellectual disabilities are completely segregated from other people.
Well, I have to admit that until I started working here, I didn't have, I had very little exposure to the fact that so many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities lived in institutions, because I grew up at home with my parents and my grandparents. And so, working here has opened my eyes to a lot of different things that I had no idea had gone on. When I first saw the film Willowbrook, I was just astounded. So what does research tell us about living in the community versus living in institutions?
It tells us that people have better lives when they live in the community, when they can participate in their communities like their neighbors do, when they can go to church or synagogue, practice their faith, when they can shop where everybody shops, when they can hang out with their friends in the community, go to the park, all the things that we do in our communities to have a good life. The research tells us that when people with intellectual disabilities have those same opportunities, they have better lives.
Some of these people that are talking about building institutions, though, say that it's kind of a good thing, so to speak, because community services aren't very good out in the community for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So, do they have a point?
I think they do have a point, Carol. Some services are great, some are good, and some are not good. And I've talked to a number of families who support building gated communities, campuses, farmsteads, whatever you want to call them, and they've had really bad experiences in the community. So when you have had a bad experience, that influences what you think might be a better option. And I think I think that's why this is happening. And we have to own what the problems are in the community. So we know people have better lives overall, but not everybody has a good life in the community. And that's what I think we need to be focusing on. So there are big waiting lists. So if you're a family and you've been on a waiting list for 10 years for community services aren't working for you. They're not good because they're non-existent,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
If you're a family and you have been in crisis and your family member needs a place to live that isn't your house and they need it right away, and that family member, your son or daughter, gets placed in a group home 3 hours from you or 4 hours from you or 6 hours from you, and you never get to see them, and they're put in a group home of people who aren't their age, don't share their interests, they don't know them, they don't like them, that's not really individualized support, and it's likely not good support. Or if your son or daughter or family member has significant challenging behavior or significant health care issues, and they're in a group home and the staff aren't competent and trained to support them, or as you know and you've experienced in your life, the staff turnover at a rate of 50% a year. So that means at the beginning of the year, you might have 2 staff people working for you, and at the end of that year, half of them aren't going to be there for you.
And it has unfortunately been my experience that, at the beginning of a given year, I might have 2 people, but, it doesn't even take a whole calendar year for that to change.
They might leave in 2 months, they might
So,
leave in 2 days, right?
yeah, so consequently, I have one direct support professional who has stayed with me for 7 years, simply because after such a long time, she says, I don't feel like I can just leave you. And in fact, she counts me among the people in her family, which is good because she talks to me like I'm a family member. Like, yes, you do have to get up and go to work because you're getting out of here, which is what my family always said. So, what can self advocates or their family members or allies do to help stop the trend of building institutions?
I think the biggest thing that needs to happen is we need to share stories about people who have positive, vibrant, great lives in the community who also happen to be people who have high support needs, meaning they need a lot of support in order to live in the community. So that's the biggest thing we can do, is to make sure our communities and all families understand that no matter what the needs are of a person, they can have a vibrant life in the community. But secondly, we need to have high expectations of our policymakers and of our service providers. So whoever your provider is, you need to let them know, hey, I expect to have staff who stay. I expect to have staff who are competent, who understand who I am as a person, and who are trained specifically to meet my needs as an individual. And if staff are trained adequately, then they should be able to meet people's needs. And to me, those are the 2 biggest things. But you also have to advocate for more funding to address the waiting list issue. That's going to take policymakers and our elected people, our politicians, ponying up some money to get people off of waiting lists and make community living a priority.
Do you think that community living for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, do you feel like that's not a priority for at least some of the people who have the dollars to possibly make a difference in terms of funding better services, getting staff that are more trained to meet individual needs?
Well, I think our elected officials are individual people too, and they've got people coming at them with every imaginable need in our communities. And so people with disabilities and their families and their allies and advocates really do have to have a very loud voice in order for our elected officials to know, hey, this is a big priority. It will rise to the top of their priority list the more calls and the more relationships they have with people with disabilities.
How do you think it's best for self-advocates to help build those relationships with people who make, government, or who make decisions about how people are going to live, where they're going to live? Is there a way that you think is maybe best for self-advocates to have their voices heard loudly enough so that the people who need to hear them really do hear them?
Well, I think the best way is for people to live and participate in their communities. So if you're living in your community and you're actively participating in it, then you're around people who are around people who are around people who are influential and who can push policymakers and our elected officials to make decisions. So the most important thing is to be active and engaged and participating in your community.
Thank you very much, Amy, for your time and your information. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Carol, for the opportunity.
No problem. No problem. Thank you.